welcome to this week's Let's Craft Together. My name is Ruthie and I work at the Decatur Library. And this week I'm going to show you how to make this lovely little case. The great thing about this is that you can fit a lot of stuff in it and it's going to hold everything securely in there. So you could put pencils in there, you could put really anything. Right now I have crochet hooks being stored in mine, and you can see you can sort of customize exactly how big you want these pockets in the front, and just you can hold whatever you'd like. So to make this, the supplies you're going to need are a sewing machine. You could also hand sew it, but it'll just take a little longer. You'll need an iron and some basic supplies like a pair of scissors, some pins, something to mark your fabric with, and that's particularly if you want to make your little pockets here. If you want to just leave them as big pockets, you can do that too. You won't need a marking pencil or marking device if you don't want to split those up into smaller sections. So the fabric that you'll need for this project is 2 pieces of fabric that are 6.5 by 11 inches, so 2 of those. Also a piece of fusible interfacing that's the same size, 6.5 by 11. If you don't have interfacing, you don't have to use it. It's just going to make your case a little bit more durable, but it'll work without it. You could also just replace this with another piece of fabric, again, to add some durability. You'll also need pieces for your pockets. So this larger pocket is going to be 6.5 again by 6 inches, and the smaller pocket is going to be again 6.5 by 5 inches. You can totally make this whole project, scale it up or scale it down if you want to store something that's smaller or something that's larger. That totally works. Just increase your inches to do that. Then I also have for the ties that are going to tie it shut, 2 pieces of fabric that are 1 inch by 6 inches long. The other thing you can do instead of doing this tie at the back method, which is what I have here, is you can do a rolled case, which would be you would make 1 longer piece of material to tie your case, and then you would wrap it all around, and then you could just tuck it inside the wrapped around piece. You could totally do that. I just like the look of the tied one with the 2 pieces. This also allows you to tie it to something else. So say you were using this for toiletries, for a trip or something like that. You could tie it on a doorknob or whatever if you have the 2 separate ones. All right, so grab those things and let's get started. By doing a little bit of ironing and a little bit of prep work before we start sewing. So we have our 2 small pieces that we're going to use for the strap. And what I'm going to do is just fold it in half with the nice sides out. If you've watched others of my videos, this is a similar process to making the straps for the mask, the face masks that I have in a previous video. So you're going to just iron it down. You're also going to want to iron about 1/4 of an inch on one side. That's just going to protect your edge there and make sure it doesn't fray as it's being used. And then what you're going to do is take either side of your fabric and fold it into that center line. That's why I like to do that first iron to make that center line, because then you know exactly where the middle of your fabric is. And then you'll just iron straight down, just like that, all the way down. And then you're going to fold that once more and make a nice little strap. Go ahead and iron that down, and then we'll just sew it on one side. And you're going to do that with both of your pieces of fabric. You could also, instead of fabric, use a piece of ribbon or really anything that's going to be small and be able to be tied. The other prep work we're going to do are on the smaller and the larger pockets. So both of those pockets, we're going to take one of the 6.5 inch sides and just fold twice about 1/4 of an inch. You could measure this, but I don't really think it's worth it. Just can eyeball it. All right, so about 1/4 of an inch, and then fold that once more. And what we're doing here is just creating a nice edge again, so it's not fraying when it's being used or things are being pulled in and out of that pocket. All right, so once we have that iron down, I would recommend pinning this too, because it just tends to do what you're seeing there, is just come up a little bit. So go ahead and do that then to both of your pockets, and then we'll sew everything. So we're gonna sew now down the edge of our straps as well as the top of our pockets. I'll just show that to you real quick here. You're gonna wanna get fairly close to the edge though. What matters more in my opinion is that it's even all the way across. So you can, like I just did, go back on your stitching just a little bit. It's just going to make things more secure. It doesn't matter as much with these pockets that things are perfectly secure at this stage, because this raw edge is going to be sewn into the body of the case. So it's going to be secured in the end. All right, and then we'll take one of our straps here. These can be a little bit fiddly to deal with, a little bit frustrating because they're so slender. But just stay patient with it. And if you wanted to, you could totally just go ahead and hand sew this, even if the rest of your bag you were sewing with a machine, just because it's so slender. It's nice to have it that slender when you're using it, but doing the sewing of it can be a little bit frustrating. So just go with what you can do. All right, I'll just sew down this edge here and then do the next one as well. Our next step here is to attach the inner facing to our fabric. So we're going to take one of the large pieces of fabric and our inner facing with the adhesive side down. It just looks a little shinier than the other side. And line it up. And I always like to use another piece of fabric over top of the inner facing, just because sometimes that adhesive tends to bleed through a little bit and get on my iron if you don't have that extra piece of fabric between them. That's just going to melt the adhesive and allow the inner facing to attach itself to the fabric. So to the piece that we have our inner facing attached to, we're going to attach also our pockets to that same piece. First, you're going to put on the larger of the two pockets so that the nice side of the fabric is facing upwards. And then you'll put on the smaller pocket, and you're just arranging these so they line up with the bottom of one of the ends. It does not matter which one. I'm just going to pin that down, and then I'm going to sew along each of these edges. You don't have to sew along the bottom because we'll sew that later. All that we're doing right now is holding the two pockets in place where we want them, so that then we can sew lines down the pocket to separate it into smaller portions. If you want to have your pockets, so say you want this back pocket to be separated into 4 sections and you only want this one separated into 1 section, you would remove this piece, sew down the center of that one, and then add this one, and then add 2 more sections. So we've got our pockets attached to our backing that has the interfacing on it. The next step we're going to do is separate these larger pockets into smaller pockets. And we'll do that by flipping it over and making some markings and just sewing down those lines that we've created with our marking tool. I'm just using a pencil here. It works just fine. If you have something like a fabric pen or something like that, that works fine too. You can also just leave these pockets just as they are, totally open like that. That's fine too. But how I like to do this is we'll take a ruler of some sort, and we know because we cut this 6.5 inches wide that halfway is going to be 3 inches and a quarter. So I'm just going to take this and line it up so that we have exactly half, which is going to be 1, 2, 3 and a quarter. And I'll just mark that, and then I can then know exactly where half of the way is down that line. And you'll feel when you get to the top of that pocket, you can just mark it there. So we've got 2 separate sections, and we'll just cut this in half again. So because of that seam allowance, we can just go right to 1.5 inches that will separate it. And it's not going to look exactly even again because of that side there, but it will be once it is all sewn together. And we'll mark that. And then you'll just continue in that same manner, measuring out. You can, use different calculations to get, 1/3 of it, whatever you want to do to make those different pockets there for you. I'm going to stop there because it's the same project, it's the same process for doing all of those pockets. But you can see with this other one that I made, I have 2 large pockets here in the middle and then smaller pockets here on the side. So these ones in the middle are the 1.5 inch ones, and then these I cut in half. So those are half of that. So you can see a general idea of how big those are going to come out to be, depending on what size you make them. Now that I have my lines marked on my fabric, I'm just going to line my machine up right against the line and go ahead and sew down that line. You just want to make it as straight as you can because that's going to determine how straight your pocket is. And as you get to the end here, you can feel through the fabric there when the pocket ends. And then just go ahead and go right over the top of it and back stitch a little bit just to secure the top of that little bit of your pocket, and do the same thing with the rest of the separated sections. All right, now that I've gotten my sections sewn as much as I want to, you're going to want to do all of that before you put everything together. I'm going to take that other large piece of fabric that we cut out, and we're going to line it up the nice side to the nice side, so you're covering up your pockets. We're also at this point going to add in our straps. When you're doing this, you want to make sure that you leave the end out that is folded over a little bit. Again, you're protecting that little end against fraying. And I'm gonna again take my ruler here and just measure 1 inch down from the top here and pin that in place. You don't have to do 1 inch, you could do it closer in or further out, doesn't really matter. That's just the point where I think it looks good. And again, the part that you're pinning to the side wall here is the part that does not have the bit that is folded over. Okay, so we're then gonna sort of fold those down a little bit. Take that piece of fabric, again, nice side to nice side, and then we'll pin around the whole edge of this, and then we're going to sew around the whole edge, leaving a little spot at the top here so we can turn everything inside out. So when you're sewing around the perimeter of your whole piece here, I would highly recommend starting at the top here before your first corner. That's just going to make, when we need to close up this gap at the top, at the end, we're going to do a little hand sewing to do that. It's just going to make it easier if you don't have that gap at one of your corners. And if you've machine sewed that, it's just going to make it a lot easier for you. So line it up right before your first turn. You also want to make sure that you're backing up on your stitches, especially at this point, because as we're turning it inside out, there's going to be a lot of strain put on that point. You're just going to go to your corner and put your needle down and then pivot and keep on going. And again, we're just going all the way around the outside with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. All right, so we've got our full piece here sewn all the way around. We've left a little hole here, about 3 inches. Between 3 and 5 inches is probably what you're going to need to turn it inside out. And then before we turn it inside out, we're just going to snip the edges of these corners. Make sure you're not cutting into your sewing there. Just getting a little bit of that bulk out of that corner so that when we do turn it inside out, it will have a nice crisp corner. All right, and then you can go ahead and turn it inside out. And you'll see your pockets there as you do this. And you're going to want to just sort of wiggle your fabric around a little bit so that you get your corners nice and poked out. If you have something that's has a little bit of a point on the end, you can use that. Like I just have a little crochet hook here. I'm just sticking that inside of my little bag thing here and poking out my corners with that so I get a nice crisp corner. It really makes a difference when you do that. I'm then just gonna flatten out my seams here all the way around and give it a quick iron. And that's just gonna make sure that my edges are all nice and flat. So I'm gonna continue around in that same way. And as you're doing the ironing around this outside edge, you're also gonna want to tuck in a little bit of that top fabric where it's not sewn, where that gap is, and just line up your two fabrics so they're flush against each other, and you can iron that down and adjust it as need be. And we're just gonna now close up this little hole we've got. So what we're gonna do is take just a needle end thread. What I like to do to make a knot at the end of that is just wrap it around my finger and roll it right off and pull tight, and you've got a nice little knot. All right, we're gonna do something called a ladder stitch to close this up. The other thing you could do is just top stitch close to the edge all the way around this, and then you wouldn't have to hand stitch it here, but I think it looks nice when you hand stitch it. This is also called an invisible stitch. So the first thing you're going to do is stick it inside your fabric and come up on one of the ridges of your two sides. Hopefully you can see that. And then we're just going to tuck that little knot that we've created down into the fabric so that we don't see it. And I'm going to show you how to do this just a little bit closer here because it can be a little confusing. It's not hard, it's just, it can be a little confusing to learn how to do. So what you're going to do, you have that first piece of thread coming out of one edge of your fabric. You're going to go straight across to the other side and put your needle into the ridge. And when I say ridge, I mean this edge that you've just ironed. And you're going to pull it through. What this does, it's going to create a series of lines straight across that looks like a ladder. That's why it's called the ladder stitch. And you're just going to keep doing the same thing, going straight across to the other side of the fabric, sticking your needle in at that point. It's really important that you're at that point because that is what makes it invisible. And just a really nice stitch. So you're going to pull it through, and you'll see when I tighten this up, you really cannot see that stitch very much at all. So just continue along that line with that stitch, and then you're all finished.